When most people think of Mike Norvell's offense, they tend to think of the running game, and that seems totally fair. He spent a lot of his early career working under Gus Malzahn, the guy renowned for bringing the wing T into the modern football game. He also has a knack for developing NFL running back talent, and he spent his first 2 years at Florida State with Jordan Travis at quarterback, relying heavily on the read option game. But all of this put together distracts from the fact that he has put together very solid passing games in the past. In fact, according to FEI+, which is an opponent-adjusted metric, he had the number 8 passing game in the whole country in 2019. So before we dive into what he's done at FSU and what he plans to do in the future, I think it's really important that we put a microscope on this 2019 season, by far his most efficient season as a play caller. So what does a typical Mike Norvell passing game look like? If I had to describe it in one word, I would call it vertical. And that's not because he's taking shots all the time, but because instead of stretching the field horizontally, he really chooses to stretch it vertically. In order to do this, he runs a lot of screens. This graph maps out how often his quarterbacks attempt certain distance passes when compared to the average college football team. You can see with this blue line, in his 4 years at Memphis, he stayed well above the 50th percentile, peaking up around 78% in passes behind the line of scrimmage. That is, screen passes. Next up is your short passing game. That's anything from 0 to 10 yards. So that tends to be your slants, your hitches, or your West Coast passing concepts. This tends to be his shortest category, never really even coming close to the 50th percentile. The next category is the intermediate passing game, which is any pass between 10 and 20 yards. And this is really where his bread is buttered. You can see he's always ranking pretty high in this and peaking at his best years in 2017 and 2019. This is where a lot of the film review is going to focus, so I'm going to talk about this a lot more later. Something kind of interesting happens when you look at this last category, which is any pass further than 20 yards. You see a dramatic jump in 2019, and while it's not going to be a huge focus of this video, it will be a big area of focus in my next video where I tackle specific problems within FSU's passing game. So these stats tell us two things. One, he likes to suck up defenses using screen passes and easy completions, and two, he then goes over the top using the deep and intermediate passing games. I went through 3 key games and charted every single passing play by type to determine how he does that. You can see here that a lot of his intermediate to long passing game comes in the form of isolation passes. And basically what that means is he's trying to isolate his man one-on-one with a specific matchup. So before we get too far into things, let's go ahead and jump into the film to see what this looks like in practice. So let's start by looking at their game against Navy, which was the 4th game of the season. Let's start with this play because I think it's really indicative of what he wants to do in the passing game. There's a clear passing strength here with 2 wide receivers and 1 tight end all to the short side of the field. That means on the long side of the field, this wide receiver is one-on-one with his corner. Plus there's only 1 safety who really won't be able to get over there to help. So pre-snap, this quarterback knows he has the one-on-one matchup that he's looking for. Since his corner's playing up, the wide receiver is going to try to beat him deep. You can see the quarterback doesn't spend any time looking anywhere else because he knows that's where his matchup is. He tries to throw the ball back shoulder, but he just overshoots a little bit. While this formation is technically balanced with 2 wide receivers up top, a wide receiver and a tight end on the bottom, this wide receiver split is so wide that he's effectively isolated on this corner. The quarterback sees a blitz is coming, and so instead of trying to take this sagging corner and beat him deep, he gives a signal to the wide receiver at the bottom of the screen that he's going to go for a quick screen and take what the defense is willing to give him. This quick screen kind of became a theme throughout the night, as Navy was content playing with a deep cover 3 and allowing Memphis to make these easy completions for quick yards down the field. But Mike Norvell, being the vertically minded coach he is, still managed to find ways to push the ball downfield. This is a very similar formation to what we saw earlier, with 2 wide receivers and 1 tight end on the boundary side or the short side of the field. But instead of going up top on this one-on-one matchup, he's going to try to push the ball downfield to one of these slot receivers. This is one of his go-to passing concepts, and it's one that's going to be instrumental in understanding how he wants to run his offense. This is called slot fade, and these 2 receivers are just going to run hitches and try to occupy their defenders. That way this wide receiver can be isolated on this outside linebacker / safety one-on-one out in space. Since Navy's running cover 3, there should be a gap here, and they effectively hit this route pretty consistently in 2019. This is another big play during that game, and it's a kind of similar concept. Navy's playing man across the board and threatening a blitz, but what Mike Norvell sees is that this slot receiver is man-on-man with this safety. They run a switch concept, which is a fairly frequent deep concept that Mike Norvell uses, but in essence what it's trying to do is just get this slot receiver one-on-one with that safety and beat him deep, and that's exactly what happens. So we can see that Mike Norvell's main objective is get his wide receivers one-on-one with the defender out in space. Let's see how that translates against Houston, who runs a completely different scheme. One thing you'll start to notice when you watch enough of Mike Norvell's games back to back is that he likes to find one base play and stick with it until the defense adjusts. Houston in this game was running a lot of cover 4, meaning that these 4 defenders are all playing deep zones. That means that in general these safeties can cheat a little bit inside because they feel like they have help on the outside of the field. So what Mike Norvell's game plan was going in was he wanted to run off these safeties with deep routes by the outside receivers and then run deep outs, forcing this safety who's cheating inside to play all the way across the field isolated on this slot receiver. This is a pretty common concept called a sail, or sometimes called a flood if there's a third receiver on that side of the field. You can see that this outside receiver runs off this corner, and now this safety is one-on-one with this slot receiver, and he's got to run all the way across the field to try to get there. That's an easy 15 yards. Another thing you can do with this flood concept is once this safety starts cheating down to try to take out this out route, it takes away any other inside and deep help that this corner has. That means on a deep post like this is easy pickings for Memphis and they get a free 15 yards out of it. So by the time the end of the third quarter rolls around, Houston was no longer willing to give away free 15-yard chunks to Memphis, and they changed their defense to play more man. But this plays right into what Mike Norvell wants to do, which is put 3 wide receivers on one side of the field and isolate his best guy, DeMonte Coxey, on the bottom side of the field on one corner. What he tends to do after this point is run a lot of fades, especially if he's in press. Here you can see that this corner is outmatched and it gives a 30-yard touchdown to Memphis. Memphis was also able to get slot fade in one time, but they weren't able to get it for a completion. So let's move on to our final game, their first game against Cincinnati, to get an indication of how they want to adjust against good defenses. This is their first play from scrimmage, and you can see that they've kind of loaded the box and put 2 wide receivers at the bottom of the screen, effectively isolating this wide receiver one-on-one against this corner. You can see instead of running a quick screen or a deep route, what happens is both the quarterback and the receiver notice early that this corner is coming on a blitz. And so they transition to what's called a hot route, where instead of carrying this deep into this safety, he just turns quickly for an easy completion. However, that would be about the only easy completion they get all night. And that's because of number 12 here on Cincinnati, Sauce Gardner, who proved to be one of the better cornerbacks in the country by his senior year, and even early on you can tell that he was special. So Memphis goes with 2 running backs and an H-back here to force Cincinnati to roll one of these safeties down to the box. This gives them that textbook isolation they're looking for at the bottom of the screen here. However, this didn't come very easily for Memphis, and all night Sauce Gardner was finding ways to shut them down. One simple adjustment is instead of running into the teeth of defense, you run away from it. Here the Memphis wide receiver stems vertically and sells that he's going to go deep, even getting the Cincinnati cornerback to turn his hips, but then he breaks it off inside and gets some space. Another thing you can do is you can change the position of your wide receivers to hunt for better matchups. Here Coxey, who's normally an outside receiver, is placed in the slot, meaning that instead of on a corner, he's now on this outside linebacker / safety. This is a much better matchup for him. Actually, this play in general should look very familiar. This is the same slot fade play against the same defense that we saw against Navy. Cincinnati's in cover 3, meaning that there's a gap between this safety and this corner. And basically, you're forcing this safety to try to run with your best receiver down the field. Brady White recognizes this and times this throw perfectly and leads to a huge play. While reminiscing on the past is fun, I think it's important to note that he's been largely unable to recapture that 2019 success in his first 2 years at Florida State. While I think there's a few major reasons for that, which will be the topic of a future video, I think that there's still some hope to be found here. There is a ceiling on this passing game that hasn't been reached yet, and hopefully it's one that Mike Norvell will have the opportunity to reach in his time in Tallahassee. Hey, thanks for watching. If you're unaware, me and the other guys at the Triple Option have a new home in Knowles 247. So over the next couple weeks, we're going to be furthering discussion with more in-depth articles and videos. So join us over there. Thanks.